Hey, this is Steve Halleck of TickTocking. As always, you can find me at Steve Halleck on Instagram or at TickTocking.com for all my watch goodness. Now, today I have two of my favorite watches. These are, of course, versions of Francois-Paul Journe's Tourbillon. You have the original Remontoir d'Égalité version and the later on the Remontoir d'Égalité with dead seconds version. So normally I don't do a review for each version that comes in of a watch. I've done reviews on each of these before, and just to do a new dial or something like that is a little bit boring. But I happen to have both of these at once, and they're both really kind of special versions, and so I thought it would be cool to talk about each of them, but also to compare and contrast the old and the new a little bit. So I'll do the older one first, the newer one second, and then we can compare them and I'll give you my thoughts on the two at the end. So let's start here. This is basically the beginning of FP Journe as a brand. He busted onto the scene with this tourbillon, and this is a very early piece. You can tell it's quite early by these large dial screws. Those were some of the earlier batches of dials. And when I say batches, I really mean batches, right? In the early days, Francois Paul's production was not so, how do we say, maybe streamlined, or basically he didn't totally have his shit together. And he was getting parts from a lot of different suppliers, and the dials would come in from various places, and so there's a lot of variation in the dials in particular. And because of this, it makes it really fun because each piece is kind of unique, and especially from batch to batch, they're very different. These old ones are very sought after now. First of all, because they're older and people always like to go back to the beginning. But also the dials have this really amazing sort of shininess to them and graininess. And they pick up some patina. It's not uncommon to see these with little spots and whatever on them. Most people just consider that to be charm. This one, however, is very clean. Most of them were made with yellow gold dials. Let me give it a good wipe here. This one happens to have a pink gold dial, which is particularly rare. And as you can see, it's not, the yellow usually, especially on the older ones, the yellow isn't too yellow and the pink isn't too pink. It's just a little bit different hues. But I'm trying to get you this light play here. Also, the really older pieces tend to have this silvery subdial with a very tight Claude de Paris engraving pattern in there. And the later pieces have a very white dial with not nearly as tight of a Claude de Paris. All of the older ones have a 38 millimeter case, except for the ruthenium pieces, which are 40 millimeters, but all of these versions are 38 millimeters, and they all have a brass movement, which you can see in the back is fairly rudimentary. Now, Francois Paul has never been that into finishing. It's just not his thing. He likes mechanisms and mechanics and design, and so especially in the early days when resources were tight, the finishing of these pieces is it's certainly passable. It's certainly nice enough, but it's not the reason you would buy this watch. This isn't a simplicity or something like that. But that does give it a certain amount of charm. It is what he intended it to be. And it's very well done. But so you can see here, you see through the movement, and you see the brass plate here, which is a big feature of the FP Journe Tourbillon, is just how big the tourbillon is and how it sort of integrates with the watch itself. It's not just a cut hole in the dial; it's an integral part of the design of the watch. So on this one, also you have this marked out, seconds ring around the tourbillon, and the tourbillon actually is your seconds hand. You can see there's a pointer at the end of it. Down here you have the Remontoir d'Égalité, right? So let's look at the dead seconds and talk about that for a second. Now this is a very, very special version of the Dead Seconds. This is called the Black Label version. And the Black Label, first of all, some people erroneously call the rose gold with black dial Black Label. Those are not Black Label. The rose gold with black dial are called boutique editions. They were supposed to only be available in boutiques, but I know of some that were sold at normal retailers. And those were just kind of normal production. They were not limited. The retail price is the same as the other rose golds. And you know, they can be cool looking, but they're not Black Label. Black Label in particular was platinum with the black dial, and these were very, very, very limited. So the deal with Black Label is, first of all, they were only available in boutiques. A boutique could only order 12 Black Label pieces a year, and that's over the entire collection, and a maximum of 2 in any given model. So the most a boutique could get in a full year is 2 Black Label tourbillons. So they're extremely, extremely limited. And then the other kicker is that in order to buy a Black Label piece from a boutique, you had to be a previous client of the boutique, a previous FP Journe owner from that boutique. So they were really made as a thank you and a special thing for Journe collectors, and they're extremely hard to find. They also had a higher retail price than the normal platinum pieces. And to me, the Black Label works particularly well in the tourbillon, and it's actually my favorite version of the Dead Seconds tourbillon, just for me to wear personally. This was my personal watch for quite a long time, so I've got a lot of experience with it. And the reason for that is that in about 2004, 2005, Francois Paul discontinued the original tourbillon and went to the Dead Seconds tourbillon. At the same time, he really revamped his manufacturing processes and went to rose gold movements in all of his watches. Now, the movement is much better finished. You have the remontoire open in the back here with this really nice black polished plate there. And in the front, instead of having the open remontoire hole, you have the Dead Seconds beading. But the main thing that makes this important for the Black Label itself is that the tourbillon, even though it's big here, it's even bigger and more exposed on the Dead Seconds version because the seconds dial was taken off. So here you have just a full open hole, and through that, you really see a lot of the rose gold plate of the movement. Now, that's important because it takes up a large portion of the dial, and so the dial color and material really plays quite a bit with this rose gold plate. Now, you know, we all have different tastes, but to me, the combination of black with the rose gold is just kind of the best that you can get. That's a classic combo, and it really suits the little bit larger 40 millimeter case, a little bit more modern feel. It doesn't have the kind of, it doesn't have the quirks of this older one. By this point, Francois Paul had figured out the manufacturing and really made things in a much kind of cleaner way. And to me, the black with the rose gold really fits with that. Another cool thing about this version is it's got the high polished power reserve hand. I believe it's the only Dead Seconds version to have that. So it kind of separates you have the blued hands as the 3 time hands, and then you've got your polished tourbillon cage and your polished power reserve. Whereas in all the other versions, the power reserve hand is blue also. So I think that's a cool thing with this version. Like I said, this is a 40 millimeter case. This is a 38. So you can see they're not terribly different on the wrist, but the proportions are definitely a little bit different. The dials are the same size. So on the 40 millimeter, you just have a little bit thicker bezel. Here, the bezel kind of disappears. And it definitely feels more solid and more significant. It's a lot more platinum, and they're both quite thin, but the 40 millimeter case is just, you know, that much sort of more modern and more, I don't know, significant and weighty one could say. So let me show you on the wrist. Again, I'll start with the original 38. I like to put watches on, kind of colorful straps. These strap choices might not be for you, but I'm just playing around. So that's the 38 on the wrist. You can see it's definitely got a vintage kind of quirky charm. And the 38 millimeters is very, I guess it's much more delicate than the 40 millimeter proportion, which to me goes really well with the kind of vintagey vibe of this piece. Now, if you go to the 40 millimeters, it's much less delicate, but again, it's not trying to have that kind of vintage vibe. So to me, the 40 millimeters goes really well with this more modern vibe to it. So there you can kind of see how they both live on the wrist. They're both slim. They're both definitely certainly by modern standards, very sleek and classically proportioned watches. But this one has this sort of, it kind of looks and feels like a much more expensive watch, I would say, than the original. Whereas the original feels like what it is, the foundation piece of a brand, and it has that, feeling of a brilliant watchmaker who is doing his best with limited resources to start a brand, versus this of the kind of tip-top work of an established master. So there you have them. That is the Black Label Dead Seconds Remontoir de Qualité Journe Tourbillon and the original Remontoir Tourbillon in pink gold dial with the platinum case. Hope you enjoyed this one, and I will be back soon.